Hi, everybody. I wanted to start by thanking you all so much for being here. This means so much to me and all of my classmates to have all of your support. So thank you first and foremost. And to start off today, I wanted to take a quick poll. So everyone, raise your hand if you've ever seen a horror movie. Yes? Okay. And keep your hand up if you enjoyed it. Okay. Okay. We had a couple hands fall. That's okay. I promise that this project is for you, whether you're new to the genre, you love it, you've never heard of it, which I hope you have. But I wanted to get started by telling you what I did. So my Keystone project is called Way Out. It's a fictional narrative podcast about a bored waiter who's working the night shift at an overnight diner. And he imagines backstories for the sleepy people around him. So this is actually inspired by something I used to do when I worked in food and retail. To keep myself awake and engaged, I would look at the people coming in and kind of think, like, where did they come from, where are they going, and develop a story around that. And so I was thinking about the form and the content of this podcast, and I thought, why not take a habit that I already have and put it in this character who is based on me. So this narrator is a horror nerd just like myself, and so a lot of these stories that he's imagining are rooted in horror history. So this is also something that I am very passionate about. It's a genre that I used to love watching just for fun, but as I grew up, I started to engage more critically with those movies and those books and those TV shows and think about what those stories are actually telling us. And those stories are, at their core, human stories told in this otherworldly and outlandish way. And it was very inspiring to see fear on screen that felt palatable and manageable, and you leave it thinking that whatever you're going through is something that you can overcome, just like the people on screen did in that crazy situation. So the stories that he imagines follow in that trend. They're inspired by classic horror movie tropes, genres, subgenres, and I really wanted this to be more than just a story. So I originally conceptualized it as this fictional narrative, and then in my research and diving into the history of horror, I really wanted to have an accompanying thing that would showcase the research I did, as well as help people appreciate the genre for what it is as much as I do. So that brings me to what the second part of my project was, on top of this 4-episode podcast. So it is the Way Out companion site. So I wanted people to engage with my project on whatever level they felt comfortable with. So if you want to just jump in and listen to a story on your commute or while you're washing dishes or something and just escape, I wanted you to be able to press play and just lose yourself in it. But if you're listening to the story and you think, that's a weird detail, or that's a weird reference, like I would like to know more about where this story came from, I wanted to create this Way Out companion site with 5 essays that correspond to each episode. So the first one, Welcome to Way Out, is an introductory message that kind of talks about me, where this project came from, and the inspirations for it. And then each episode after that has its accompanying essay. So the first one, for example, A Knife Falls to the Floor, follows the first episode of the podcast, which is heavily inspired by classic slasher movies from the 80s and 90s, like Scream, Halloween, Friday the 13th. And that essay goes into the symbolic representation of slashers and what they could be teaching us about morality or about the societal fears of the 80s, and things that people can easily write off a movie like that because they seem goofy or they seem just like for shock value, but really when you get to the root of it, they are based in this deep fear of the mundane that was kind of on the rise in the 80s and 90s. So I tracked that in the first episode. And then the other ones talk about things like haunted house movies, the theme of compartmentalization and social isolation. And the last one follows escapism as a theme for horror. So part of the podcast takes place in the physical diner, which is named Way Out, and part of it takes place in the narrator's imagination, where he is inspired by these movies just like I was. And so I hope that you recognize at least one of these. So these are 3 inspirations that I had. Hereditary is a contemporary movie, and I was really inspired by its portrayal of family and isolation, as well as almost a personal sense of replacement in who you're supposed to be versus who you are. Poltergeist is one of the most famous haunted house movies, and Scream, as I mentioned, is a very classic slasher. So these represented both thematic and genre inspirations that I had. They some of them are directly mentioned in the podcast, some of them are not, but they were all behind the scenes. And so I had some more inspiration. So this one first was a podcast that I was listening to a lot when I was redoing my presentation before my senior year. It's called The Antiquarium of Sinister Happenings, and this podcast really was inspirational for the form of it. This tells the story of a shop where each artifact in the shop has a sinister backstory. And so I wanted to kind of emulate that same uniting location, but taking a more personal approach to it. And then this second one, It Came from the Closet, which was the Bible for this project, is a collection of 25 contemporary critics who are queer and trans discussing different horror movies and talking about their own personal experiences on top of that. So everything from the portrayal of bisexuality in Jennifer's Body to something like The Blob and the sense of sexual release. There is all you can think of in this book. And it was really, reading this gave me a lot of background research as well as a lot of the inspiration for the actual stories themselves. And so I don't want to give too much away because I don't want to spoil the story, but I really want you to know what I did, because when we're all here, you can see this product, but behind the scenes, there was over a year of conceptualization. I wrote all of the essays myself. I wrote all of the episodes myself, and I sat at a booth in the communications building, and I recorded all of them, and then put them all on my laptop and edited them. So it was truly a pet project of mine that I let nobody see until it was ready. And so I am so proud of the work I did and all of the writing I did, because I had never finished a story before this, and so I wanted to prove to myself that I could. And so I'm proud to say that my little personal project is now available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and if you scan this QR code, you can get the link to the companion site where you can read all of the essays and a little bit more of my other writing if you're interested. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions and excited to hear what you think. Questions? Sorry.
This is fantastic. I'm happy to for this. Big gay horror nerd. I'm wondering, is there, I know this is maybe reaching into spoiler territory, but maybe without story context, is there a horror beat that feels especially queer to you in any bits of the story? I think like part of being queer, it has a lot of fear in it and a lot of like themes of like identity and discovery. How does that fit alongside this this genre you're so like trenched in?
So actually, one of the episodes, I was inspired a lot by being a senior and graduating and thinking about the workplace. It's a source of, I think, a lot of stress for queer people, especially in a setting where you're expected to kind of look like this and dress very formal, and everybody kind of wears a collared shirt and khaki pants, and it can feel very stifling for queer people who are very comfortable expressing themselves visually. And so one of the episodes, I looked at kind of an extreme sense of repression in trying to like stifle down a queer identity in order to put on this front, which was the source of one of the episodes. And so I think not necessarily a niche in the horror genre, but in that kind of mundane, everyday fear of something so simple as a job that queer people are faced with and taking that to the extreme, I think, is what horror does, and that's what I really wanted to do. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the process of writing fiction and nonfiction in tandem, because the podcasts, of course, are fictionalized stories that you created, and then the companion essays sort of delve into the history a little bit more. And I just thought I'd love to hear about your writing process.
Yeah, awesome. So, that's a broad question. So I started with the stories. They started as, again, pet projects of mine, just something that I thought would be entertaining to do in my free time, and then I thought I could make something out of it. And so the essays kind of came as I was writing and realizing that I was taking the story in a certain direction. I was kind of looking back at myself and thinking, why did I feel like that was the right choice? Or where is this coming from? And so it was kind of a backwards process where I was like, okay, I'm writing the story about workplace isolation, but let me look at kind of horror that parallels that. And then I dove into that as well. Took those references and notes and then went back, edited the stories, and then wrote the essays following that. So I wrote the essays the spring semester and wrote the episodes the fall semester. And it really was a reflective process, writing the nonfiction after the fiction. I think the tone of the essays as well, you can tell it's very much me looking back on them and saying, this was an inspiration, this felt like the right thing to do. And so I think writing them in tandem, I think would have been very hard. So I took much of I want to create this product and then create a companion to it after I already know what I'm talking about. So it was definitely a lot of personal thinking about why I'm doing this, who am I doing this for, and what do I want them to take away from it.
So I adore this idea because I am also a queer horror nerd, so I am so for this. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your relationship with horror and with fear has evolved since you were younger, because I know for me, very much so, different things scare me now or get to me now compared to when I was younger. And so I was just wondering what your experience was.
Yeah, so my mom is actually here right now, so she's gonna laugh, but I was always a very anxious child, still a very anxious person, I think everyone can agree. And so I was someone who was very familiar with fear of just kind of everyday things, from my friends in elementary school to like getting a homework assignment done and like what would happen if I didn't get it done, like I don't know. So it was something that was kind of always in the back of my mind. And I saw my first horror movie wasn't a horror movie, it was the 80s Clue movie based on the board game, which I talk about in the first essay if you're interested. But it was just something that there was a specific scene in the kitchen where somebody falls out of the fridge. Sorry. And it kind of just made me realize that there's so much fear around us in something as simple as a refrigerator. And like, I couldn't like allow myself to suffer in that way. And I saw horror as almost a inoculate for that, something that I could take kind of little doses of fear and see that it's okay to feel that way, and it's okay because these people are in a crazier situation than I am and they're making it, so I can make it through whatever I am. So I wouldn't say that it's gone away, but it's become more manageable as I find people and content around me that makes me feel like home.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you.